Hi students, this is a exploration of the uterus and exploration of the pathway to the release of the ovum and the pathway of the journey of the sperm to fuse with the ovum. There's a lot of terms on this image, but don't worry, you're not going to be required to know all of these terms. We just want to be able to understand the general pathway. So we have here the vagina, the vaginal canal. This is where sex occurs. And when a man releases sperm, the sperm will make its way through the cervix. Okay. Now the cervix, most of the time, has essentially a kind of plug that keeps the sperm from being able to fully enter. But during certain times of the month, during a woman's fertility window, which is essentially 4 or 5 days, somewhere in the middle of the month, the cervix is a little more open and will allow sperm to enter. Now, this cervix also winds up sealing up during pregnancy. So sperm, billions of sperm, or 500 million or so, get released into the uterus. Now, as you can see, there is a lot going on in the uterus. There's a lot of tissue here. During the menstrual cycle, the thickness of the cervix will vary. As the menstrual cycle develops throughout the month, this tissue thickens and thickens and thickens. You can see there's a lot of blood vessels here. This is a very blood-rich area. And the reason is this is an area that has to support life. And at the end of every menstrual cycle, this tissue, a lot of it gets shed. There's going to be a lot of squeezing and contracting to push this tissue out of the vagina, which is what happens during a woman's period. So sperm enter into the uterus. And as you see, there's 2 pathways that they can travel. And as they go, I've said that this is like an obstacle course. There's a lot of things that will potentially trap or stop the sperm. So sperm can get caught in the cervix. It can get caught within the tissue and stop. It could go down the wrong pathway. What I mean by wrong pathway is every month, on average, a woman will release an ovum, an egg, from one of the 2 ovaries. So whether it's from this side or this side is somewhat random. So some sperm, because sperm don't have eyes or brain, might go, let's assume that the ovum is released from this side and half of the sperm go this way. Well, they're not going to wind up impregnating or fusing with the egg. So assuming that right here, one of these eggs get released from the ovary, this whole structure here is the ovary. It is what stores the ovum. Remember, a woman is born with all of her eggs, but they are not mature. They don't mature until they are released from the ovary, and that happens every month after a woman hits puberty. So approximately, on average, let's say age 12, a woman has her first period. That means she has released her first mature egg. They are essentially held in storage until it is time for them to mature and then be released. So a woman releases her egg into the fallopian tube. This number 11 is known as, there's several terms for it. Uterine tube, oviduct, all of this is fallopian tube is the other term. I believe that the person who discovered it was an Italian named Giovanni Falloppia, but I could be wrong about that name. That's not too important. All right, so the egg is released from the ovary into the fallopian tube, and somewhere in here is where the sperm and the egg will meet. It can't meet when the egg is in the uterus, because if it meets there, it is too late. And ideally, it doesn't want to meet too early into the journey of the fallopian tube because it doesn't want to develop too much. Unfortunately, sometimes an sperm and egg can fuse very early in and then can get stuck in the fallopian tube. And then a woman is experiencing something that was known as an ectopic pregnancy, which is very dangerous for a woman. A woman who has an ectopic pregnancy might wind up having to have surgery to remove the entire fallopian tube, because if the embryo starts to develop here, it could get stuck. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong, but the miracle of life is such that it does not often go wrong. So the egg travels along the fallopian tube and meets up with a sperm. So a lot of things have to happen for that to happen. First, the couple has to have sex. It has to be at the right time for the egg and the sperm to meet. The sperm has to be able to find the egg traveling through the collective reproductive system. It has to go down the correct fallopian tube, and it has to be able to successfully find and infiltrate into the egg. If all of that happens, then the developing embryo, remember we said that a zygote is the fusion of a sperm and an egg. So we take a sperm cell and an egg cell, they fuse together and they become one cell. So two becoming one. That single cell is called a zygote. And over time, that single cell becomes two cells, then four, then eight, and so on. And that's happening all along in the fallopian tube. It's usually about 32 cells or more by the time the embryo actually manages to make it to the uterine wall. Now, the uterine wall has to be thick enough to be able to deliver nutrients. Remember, the egg has enough nutrients to last a couple of days, but that is not enough nutrients to support the cellular division, the mitosis that is happening in the egg. It needs a constant supply of nutrients. So once the embryo has bonded to the uterine lining, now it is getting a supply of nutrients to continue to develop and nourish and grow the embryo. So we define life as a zygote when it is one cell. And for the first 3 months of the development of the baby, we call it an embryo. It's called an embryo because it is not fully complete. All of the parts are not fully developed until more or less 3 months, because all of these different things need to develop. There needs to be a heart and all the organs and all the limbs and all of those things. That takes, give or take, 3 months. From month 3 till birth, that is predominantly the development and growth of the baby. That's why we differentiate the first 3 months as being an embryo and the last 6 months as being a fetus. The first 3 months are the most tricky. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. And oftentimes, if that something goes wrong, the woman's body will simply disconnect the uterus, the uterine lining, from the embryo. This is what we'd call a miscarriage. That is actually a fairly common thing, as we are beginning to discover. For most of human history, we didn't quite understand that because we didn't have the technology to see the developing embryo. But this is also why many cultures do not share that a woman is pregnant until about month 3, because the potential for losing the developing embryo is high, relatively speaking. So there's a lot going on here. The things that I would like students to be focused on would be the ovary, which is what stores the eggs, the ovum themselves, circle all the ones that we need to know. The vagina, the cervix, the ovary, the uterus. This term, the endometrium, this is the new tissue that gets developed in the uterus. This idea of the uterine tube is the same thing as the fallopian tube.